The wind howled through the alleys of Chicago, sharp as a blade, slicing between the forgotten bricks of an old neighborhood that hadn't seen warmth in years. Streetlights flickered lazily above cracked sidewalks, brushing a pale glow over the thin layer of snow. And there, tucked between two nameless concrete buildings, was a small, shivering shape curled up against a wall. Harper Lane, 13 years old, had her knees pulled tightly to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like if she let go, she might fall apart. She wore a denim jacket with a torn shoulder, layered over an old knit sweater. Neither did much to hold off the bite of a January night. Draped around her shoulders was a faded floral blanket, the last thing she had left from her mother's funeral a year ago. The corners were frayed, stained in places from serving as a pillow, a coat, a bed. But to Harper, it was home. The distant whistle of a train echoed through the city, then faded. Chicago didn't sleep, but it never noticed Harper was alive. When she first ran away from the group home, Harper used to be scared of adults, of the police, of the dark. But after 6 months of sleeping on sidewalks, eating leftover bread, and dodging the stares of strangers, she wasn't scared anymore. Not because she was brave, but because she was tired. Tired of pretending to be okay. Tired of hoping someone would be kind, only to catch that look, like she was something someone forgot to throw away. Sometimes she wished her mom had never died. But then she remembered. Wishes like that never reached anyone. Harper wiped her eyes and let her head fall onto her knees. Her nose was red from the cold. Her hands were stiff, lips cracked and bleeding, but she didn't cry. The tears had run dry in autumn. A stray cat darted across the alley. A truck roared past. Harper didn't move. She just sat there, part of the wall now, a 13-year-old ghost with no name, no search party. To the world she didn't exist. But she was still here, with shallow breaths, shaking fingers, and a blanket that used to smell like her mother. Now it smelled like frost. Harper looked up, eyes squinting through the white fog that blanketed the city. Yellow streetlights spilled onto half-melted snow, stretching shadows into strange shapes. A gust of wind swept by, making the walls creak like they were whispering their pain. She shifted, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. Then she froze. A sound. Faint, but real. A broken noise carried by the wind like someone gasping for breath, their chest aching with every pull. Harper held her breath. There it was again. Not a person, not a cat. It was wet. Heavy. Like each inhale hurt. She got to her feet, stumbling, weak from cold, from hunger, from a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. Guided by instinct, Harper followed the sound along the cracked sidewalk, past a rusted dumpster at the mouth of the alley, and then she saw it, a dog. Big, matted fur the color of ash and shadows, curled in on itself from the cold. One leg stuck out, crusted with dried blood. The tip of one ear was torn, long scrapes down its back like it had been dragged. But what Harper couldn't look away from were its eyes. Red. Swollen. Like it had been crying. Like it was waiting for the end. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just breathed. Barely. Each rise of its chest looked like a struggle. Harper stepped forward, slowly. She was still shaking, but not from the cold anymore. From something else. A strange feeling blooming inside her chest. Like someone had just held a mirror to her heart, wrapped in fur and frost. The dog twitched its head. Barely a movement, like it wanted to look away but didn't have the strength. Harper knelt down. The cold hit her knees like needles. The snow soaked straight through. She didn't flinch. She reached out, one hand, then the other. Fingers worked carefully at the corners of her blanket. The only blanket. Her last connection to warmth, to her mom, the only shield between her and the winter. She laid it over the dog, gently, carefully, like she was tucking in a child. The dog let out a soft whine, just a whisper of a sound, but enough to make Harper pause. Those eyes were watching her now, not afraid, not grateful, just quiet. Harper ran her hand down its side. Her fingers brushed against matted fur caked with dirt and blood. She didn't pull away. It was strange. If it were a grown-up, she would have shrunk back. If it were a stranger's hand, she would have run. But here, next to this creature, she wanted to stay. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to die alone." The dog exhaled a long, shaky breath. She sat down beside it. No more blanket. The wind crept down her collar, slicing through every layer. But Harper didn't crawl back to the wall. She pulled the blanket tighter over the dog's body, adjusted it to cover its ribs, then laid her hand there, to keep it warm. For the dog, not for her. A snowflake landed on her shoulder, another on the dog's back. Neither of them moved. Harper stared at it. After a while, she spoke, barely louder than the wind. "I'll call you Blitz." The name slipped from her lips like a breath, and suddenly, the night didn't feel quite so cold. As if in that single moment, Harper had named not just a dog, but a piece of her own soul. And then, Blitz stirred. It wasn't a flinch, not a reflex, not the twitch of something startled. It was more like a living thing, standing at the edge of life and death, still trying to turn toward the one sound that felt most familiar. Blitz shifted closer. No barking, no growling, no pleading. Just a soft movement, inching toward Harper until the thin, bony shoulder of the dog brushed against her knee. Harper held her breath. That warmth, it wasn't like the kind that came from a heater or a thick coat. It was a different kind of warmth. The kind born from the thought, "You didn't leave me." Harper sat still. One hand rested on the blanket covering Blitz, the other lifted gently, slowly tracing down his back. Her fingers moved over coarse fur, stiff with dried mud, blood, and the metallic scent of old wounds. But she didn't pull away. For the first time in months spent surviving in shadows, Harper wasn't afraid to touch someone. Blitz exhaled. A long, deep breath, like someone letting go, realizing they weren't alone anymore. His eyes closed, not from exhaustion, not from fear, but from something softer, a kind of surrender only possible between two souls who'd both been forgotten by the world. Harper drew her knees tighter, so Blitz could rest his head on her lap. The wind still swept through the alley, rattling rusted tin above them. But she didn't shiver. It wasn't warm, but it was quiet. A car passed in the distance, its headlights sliced through the narrow space between the buildings. For a moment, that light caught Harper's face, revealing a small, thin frame, sunken eyes that still managed to shine, and a smile. Faint, but real. Blitz didn't fall asleep right away. Harper could feel his breathing, still fast. A low whimper escaped now and then as he shifted. She knew his body ached. Yet Blitz pressed closer, nudged in tighter, as if to say, "I'm still here, because of you." Outside, the snow began to fall harder. Inside this forgotten corner, two souls leaned into each other. No words, no promises, just two living things, unwanted, unseen, with nowhere to go, who chose to stay. Together, no mattress, no heater, no roof to hold back the wind, just a narrow space between crumbling buildings, a thin blanket, and two heartbeats, one small, one strong, beating quietly side by side. Harper whispered again, the words nearly swept away by the wind. Blitz, sleep now. And in the frozen stillness of Chicago, the kind of cold that steals sensation, direction, and faith, two living beings found, through one small act of kindness, the very first thread tying them back to life. The next morning, Harper opened her eyes to the distant wail of a train. Pale gray light filtered through the shattered glass above the alley, casting soft reflections across her face. Thin, smudged, but alive. Blitz was still there, his head resting on her legs, one eye gently closed, one ear perked, the other drooped, like he had just come through a silent storm. Harper reached out and touched his forehead. Still breathing. Weak, but steady. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Harper knew, today and tomorrow, she would no longer be alone. She rose slowly, pulling the thin blanket back around her shoulders, then motioned to Blitz. He didn't wait for a second cue. Though his legs were still shaky, Blitz stood up right beside her. Like a guard, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. They wandered through the southern streets of the city, places where people rarely turned their heads. The sidewalks were littered with dead leaves and soggy newspapers. The walls reeked of garbage and long-forgotten stories. Harper didn't beg. She didn't hold a sign. She didn't raise a hand. She simply walked, eyes fixed on the pavement, where hope often lay next to things people threw away. She picked up a half-eaten piece of bread, a soft, bruised apple, a sealed water pouch someone might have dropped. Every time Harper bent down, Blitz stood guard right behind her, eyes scanning the surroundings like he was watching over someone small the world didn't see as worth protecting. Once, a large man stepped out of a bus stop and unexpectedly walked toward her. Harper backed up. Blitz immediately stepped forward. No bark, no growl, just stood there, firmly planted, front paws like stakes in the ground. The man stopped, frowned. Then, perhaps reading something in Blitz's stare, turned and walked away without a word. Blitz didn't need to make a sound. He didn't growl. But somehow, his presence, tall, calm, always placing his body between Harper and the world, made people hesitate. A woman passed by, holding her daughter's hand. The little girl, maybe 4 years old, looked up at Harper, then at Blitz. She smiled and waved. Blitz tilted his head. One ear twitched, then his tail wagged. Not much. Just a small flick, like a gentle hello from someone who once remembered what warmth felt like. The girl giggled. Her mother pulled her along, but still glanced back more than once. Harper looked down at Blitz. You really know how to get people's attention, huh? Blitz didn't answer. But when Harper bent down to share a piece of her bread with him, Blitz didn't eat right away. He licked her hand once, then began to chew. They spent that whole day drifting between corners of the city, where the only warmth came from bakery vents or forgotten coffee cups left near trash bins. Every time Harper paused, Blitz paused. Every time she sighed, Blitz tilted his head. In a city that never stopped moving, no one noticed a thin girl walking with a dog. But maybe, in that silence, they were beginning to be seen by those who were just as lonely. That night, they found shelter behind an old pickup truck parked by the curb. Harper pulled out her blanket, sat down on the cold concrete, and gave a little signal. Blitz stepped closer, curled up, and rested his head on her lap. Harper said nothing. She just looked at him. a long gaze with no need for words. In his eyes, she saw something familiar, not an animal's stare, but the look of a soul that had felt pain, had known fear, and stayed anyway. She leaned her head onto his back. For a long while, she didn't speak. She didn't cry either. Some sadness doesn't fall as tears. It just dissolves quietly into your breath, sinking into your chest, your fingers, your eyelids. That's how they slept through their third night, then a fourth. Then a week passed. No one asked Harper her name. No one asked where Blitz came from. To the rest of the world, they were just two drifting shadows. One girl, one dog, too small to be someone's story. But to each other, they were everything left that still mattered. One afternoon, as soft sunlight angled across the rooftop of the train station, Harper sat on the stone steps near the platform entrance. Her eyes followed the rush of shoes, the rolling of suitcases, the whistle that signaled the train's arrival. The smell of cinnamon waffles from a nearby food cart mixed with the metallic scent of rusted rails. A strange blend of warmth and longing. Blitz lay next to her, chin resting on her leg like always, eyes half closed, not asleep, just at peace. Harper pulled out the blanket and laid it under him so the cold stone wouldn't stiffen his bones. A small gesture. But for her, it had become instinct, like the way people wipe the doorknob for someone they love when the weather turns. She sat there for a long time, until the shadows began to stretch across the concrete. Then, for no reason at all, she started to sing. It was an old melody, very old. So old that Harper wasn't even sure she remembered the words. But her mother used to sing it to her, back when they lived in that 6th-floor apartment, on winter nights when the living room was warm and her mother's fingers combed gently through her hair. Her voice was soft, so soft even she could barely hear it. But Blitz heard. He lifted his head. One ear stood up. His tail thumped once against the pavement. Harper startled and stopped. Blitz didn't blink. He just stared at her, like he was saying, "Keep going." She smiled, a small, shy smile. Then she sang again. Not loud, but clearer. And for the first time in many months, her voice rose for something other than survival. People walking by began to slow down. Not because the voice was special, but because something about the scene made it hard to look away. A little girl in a baggy coat, voice barely holding together. A large dog curled close beside her, deep brown eyes following every trembling note. A woman stopped and slipped a crumpled bill into the knit cap placed in front of her. Then a man pulled out his phone, filming just a few seconds. No one spoke, no one smiled. But no one walked away either. Harper didn't notice. She didn't care about the money, didn't even register the camera. In that moment, it was just her and Blitz, and the quiet encouragement in his eyes. The song ended as the last rays of sunlight slid across the floor and melted into the dark corners of the station. Blitz was still watching her. His tail gave a soft wag, like he didn't want this moment to end just yet. Harper leaned down and touched his forehead. "Thanks for listening." Blitz closed his eyes. This time, he really slept. His lips twitched like he was dreaming. And Harper didn't realize. Something had already started to shift, quietly, just beyond her awareness. An 18-second video. A fragile song. A dog nodding gently along. A homeless child singing by the train tracks was about to reach millions. But Harper didn't know that yet. She didn't know fate was already stepping out from the shadows. 2 blocks away, tucked beneath the awning of an old coffee shop with stained glass and warm yellow lights, stood an older woman. Her gray hair was pinned in a neat bun, with a few strands falling along the collar of her ash-colored coat. It wasn't new, but it was clean and sharply pressed. She wasn't holding a phone, wasn't filming. She just stood there, watching, as if her eyes had seen something long before the lens had a chance to capture it. Vivian Carver hadn't planned to stop. She was only passing through the station to catch her usual train back to the sanctuary out near the edge of town. Just another ordinary day, a routine that had repeated itself for 30 years. But the moment she heard that voice, off-key, unsteady, as delicate as a final breath, her steps faltered. She saw Harper first. A small frame, so thin it almost disappeared into the wall behind her. And then she saw Blitz. At first, Vivian thought it was just a stray, but when Blitz's eyes met hers, in a fleeting instant, something stirred. Not in the shape, not quite in the fur, or the way he rested his chin on Harper's knee. It was in the look. A look she'd once known. A look that had once made her believe some dogs didn't just understand words. They understood what people were too afraid to say. Vivian held her breath. That feeling, like a long-forgotten string, had just been plucked after years buried in silence. Blitz didn't turn away, didn't bark. He just looked. Not wary, not aggressive. Just still, as if he too had recognized something familiar in the woman standing under the tree. Vivian took a step forward, then stopped. She had seen it too many times, well-meaning people stepping in too quickly and shattering the delicate thread between two souls who had been abandoned by the world. So instead of approaching, she stepped back. Just a little. Choose to watch from afar. And then she heard the singing. It wasn't perfect. She couldn't hit the high notes, but the trembling in Harper's voice at the end of each line clenched Vivian's heart. Because it didn't come from a trained mouth. It came from a child with nothing left but the memory of someone who once loved her enough to sing her to sleep. Vivian turned her head. Not because she was cold, not because she was in a hurry, but because if she stood there a second longer, she might do something wrong. Something that would break a moment that wasn't meant to be touched. But the dog's gaze and that song stayed with her, like a faint echo, threading its way through layers of memory long buried under dust and time. Through the heart of a woman who had believed, for years, that she was too old, too tired, and too closed off to be moved by anything again. That evening, Vivian returned to Northgate Sanctuary later than usual. She didn't mention the child at the station, didn't bring up the video that a stranger had just posted online. But as she walked past the recovery ward for aging dogs, the room where one corner had always been left empty, as if waiting for something unnamed, she stopped and stared at that space for a long time. In her eyes, it was no longer just an empty corner. It was a place already claimed by something rare, something sacred, something on its way home. As long as she was patient enough to wait. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Harper and Blitz were searching for shelter. After 3 straight nights of sub-zero cold, Harper could barely feel her fingertips. Every breath she let out vanished quickly, like even the air was afraid of being seen. Even Blitz, tougher against the cold than she was, had started to slow down. Each step left a faint print in the trampled snow. Near the end of the train tracks, tucked behind an old auto repair shop that had long been closed, there was an abandoned garage. The steel door hung crooked and rusted, but it blocked the wind well enough. Harper pulled Blitz inside, pushed the creaky door shut behind them, and gently latched it closed. The inside was dark, steeped in the scent of old gasoline and motor oil. But at least There was no wind howling through their bones. Harper took out the thin blanket, spread it across the concrete floor, one hand holding the edge in place, the other digging into her pocket. 2 packs of crackers, scavenged from a dumpster behind a fast food joint. One was already crushed. She broke it, giving half to Blitz and saving a small piece for the morning. There was no time to think about lunch. Blitz didn't pounce on the food. He sat down and looked at her first. Only when Harper set the piece in front of him did he lower his head to eat, slowly, carefully, as if honoring the food given by someone who had shared her last bite. Harper chewed slowly. The crackers were dry, hard, but in that darkness they were still having dinner. She looked up at the ceiling, rusted sheets above her, patched with gaps that showed a speckled sky. The wind slipped through the cracks, creating a soft, sorrowful whistle. Blitz licked his paw, then laid down on his side. Harper curled up gently beside him, her hand sliding under his neck. His fur wasn't as thick as the ones she'd seen in the dog books at the shelter, but it was warm. Warmer than anything she'd had since walking out the doors of that group home. Outside, the wind blew on. Snow kept falling. The world kept turning, indifferent to the 2 souls lying close together beneath a sheet of frozen metal. But inside that small space, a heartbeat echoed, steady and slow. A breath rose and fell. A warm tongue gently licked her cheek before sleep took them both. There was no pillow, no nightlight, no whispered bedtime story. Only breath, only the silent presence of a creature who couldn't speak, but never walked away. Harper shifted in her sleep, her arm still looped around Blitz's neck. The warmth from his back spread through her side, guarding her chest from the bitter wind that wanted in. But no night stays quiet forever. Around 2 a.m., the door clanged open. A sudden, violent noise, like someone had kicked it in. Blitz opened his eyes immediately. He didn't bark. He just stood. Between Harper and the danger, that stance, firm, instinctive, needing no command, was etched deep into the body of a dog once trained to face chaos. A flashlight swept across the room. Boots scraped the concrete floor. Then a dry, nasty laugh rang out. "What do we have here? A little girl and... Wait a second." The man stopped. A footstep moved forward. Then a guttural voice snapped through the dark, thick with rage. You're that dog." "It's you. You're the one that got my brothers locked up." Harper jolted awake. Her eyes hadn't adjusted to the dark, but the sound of that voice sliced deeper than any wind ever could. Blitz growled, low and deep from his throat, like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. His back arched, fur bristled along his spine. His eyes were no longer those of a stray being cared for. They were the eyes of a warrior. Waiting, 3 men. Thin, jittery. Cigarette smoke and sweat clung to their clothes. One gripped a metal pipe. Another clutched a small knife. The third, who stood further back, talked the most. "You really thought you could just disappear. Blitz, right? You made me lose 4 guys. You made them hunt us down. I swore, if I ever saw you again." Blitz didn't wait. He lunged. No bark, no hesitation. The instant Harper curled into herself from fear was the same instant Blitz exploded forward like an arrow loose from a drawn bow. A heavy collision, a scream. Then chaos, stomping feet, metal clashing, curses flung through panic and pain. Harper curled into the wall, arms wrapped tight around her head. She couldn't see, not clearly, but every sound etched itself into her mind. The sounds of survival, the sounds of life being cornered. One of them lunged, charging straight toward her. Harper screamed, but Blitz had already turned back. In one swift move, Blitz locked his jaws around the man's arm and yanked him down like a chokehold in a street fight. Blood splattered. The smell of iron flooded the air, sharp and foul. The man staggered. All three took off running, scrambling over each other as they fled through the garage door, still gaping open. Silence returned. Only the sound of panting remained, harsh, ragged, then slowing down. Harper didn't dare lift her head, but when Blitz came back to her, his steps were slow. One side of his body was dark, wet, blood. Panic overtook her. She dropped to her knees, fumbling, breath shaking apart into choked sobs. No, no, no. Blitz didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply rested his head on Harper's lap. His tongue brushed her hand, soft and light, like he was saying, "It's okay." But Harper knew. Part of Blitz's strength had been left behind on that cold floor. And tomorrow, there might not be enough left. A drop of blood landed on the back of her hand, hot, heavy, and it brought with it a tremor that reached deep inside her bones. Harper didn't even know how she ended up bending over him. All she knew was that she held Blitz close, arms wrapped tight as his chest rose and fell, slower and slower. His eyes were still open, but they looked dimmer now. In the faint light filtering through a rusted seam in the metal roof, his fur had turned a deep crimson along his side. The blood had soaked through the old blanket, spreading like a dark ink stain. Harper twisted around, digging through her coat pocket. She pulled out a scrap of fabric, pressed her hand to the wound. Her fingers, small and shaking, applied pressure to stop the bleeding. Blitz let out a low sound but didn't pull away. The garage door was still open. The wind blew in. The night pressed close. But Harper didn't care. She leaned in, whispering into his ear. "Don't leave me. Don't be like Mom, please!" No answer, only the breath. Thinning. Blitz's eyes were still slightly open. Not all the way, like he still wanted her to know he was here. But Harper could feel it, the tiny twitches in his muscles, the way his shoulder tensed just enough to hold on. A distant train whistle cut through the dark, long and lonely, like it knew someone needed saving. Harper lifted her head. She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry, too dry. No tears left to give. But her heart, it was breaking, piece by piece, a piece for her mother, a piece for herself, and a piece for this dog, the first living thing who hadn't left her behind. She held him tighter, her voice trembling, cracking apart as it came out. "You hear me? You don't have to fight anymore. We're okay now. We've got each other." Blitz opened his eyes, slowly, and let out a breath. Long, deep, like a reply, like he understood. They stayed that way, still, side by side. Nothing left to do. Nowhere else to go. Until... A car's headlights shone through the crack in the garage door. A silhouette appeared at the entrance. A hand reached out, and a voice, gentle, a little shaken, broke through the shadows. "Oh my God, Blitz!" Harper snapped around, her arms still wrapped around him. It was a woman. The car's lights glowed behind her, backlighting her wind-tousled silver hair, her long, dark coat, her wide eyes frozen in recognition. Harper backed away, instincts flaring. But the woman didn't come closer. She knelt instead. Her eyes locked on Blitz. "Blitz, is it you? Is it really you?" Her voice cracked, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Blitz opened his eyes again. I looked at her. No barking, no growling, just looking. For a long time. Harper looked at Blitz, then at the woman. Her body was still trembling, but something, small, invisible, was starting to shift. The silence hung heavy, like snow that hadn't melted yet. Then the woman extended her hand, not fast, not forced, and said softly, "You need saving, both of you." For the first time in months of surviving, Harper heard a voice that didn't give orders, didn't pity her, didn't ask questions, it just cared. At that moment, Blitz rested his head on Harper's lap again, but his eyes stayed on the woman, as if Blitz knew his journey wasn't ending here, and Harper, for the first time, didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel alone, because someone had seen them both, and didn't ask why. At that moment, Blitz rested his head on Harper's lap again, but his eyes, they stayed on the woman. As if Blitz knew his journey wasn't ending here, and Harper, for the first time, didn't feel invisible when someone looked at them both, and didn't ask why. Morning came slowly after a bitter, sleepless night. A thin veil of snow had settled over the rusted garage roof. Wind slipped in through the seams, carrying with it the scent of rust, old oil, and the sharp chill of a city still half asleep. Harper sat curled up, arms still wrapped around Blitz. The old blanket was now damp, stained with both blood and dirt. She hadn't slept all night, or if she had, it was only for seconds at a time, drifting in and out of some blurred place between nightmares and reality. A car engine echoed in the distance. Harper didn't move, but Blitz's ear twitched. A gray SUV rolled to a stop just outside the garage. No honking. No one called her name, just presence. As if it had always known where to go, arriving not too early, not too late. The car door opened. The woman from last night stepped out. Her long coat brushed her ankles, holding in it something you couldn't quite name. Not authority, not wealth, but something lost and somehow found again. Vivian said nothing. She simply walked forward, slow and measured, stopping just at the threshold. Blitz looked at her. Still no barking. Harper lifted her head, tightening her grip around him. She didn't know who this woman was, didn't know what she wanted. But in her eyes, Harper saw something she'd never seen in any adult before. Recognition. Vivian knelt. She didn't flinch at the cold, filthy cement. Her hands rested gently on her knees. Her gaze never left Blitz. Her lips moved slightly, then stopped, like she was afraid she'd break the moment just by speaking. "You're still alive," she whispered, more to herself than to them. And then, a single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away, didn't hide it. Harper opened her mouth, but her throat was dry. She didn't know what to ask, didn't know if she should trust or run. Her heart pounded fast, sensing something fragile was unfolding in front of her, and she was terrified that even breathing wrong might make it disappear. Vivian placed a hand gently over her chest, like trying to steady the emotion rising in her ribs. Her eyes were wet, but a soft smile bloomed at the corners of her mouth. When her gaze moved from Blitz to Harper, it warmed, like spring sunlight after a brutal winter. "How long have you been with her, Blitz?" she asked, voice barely above a breath. No one answered. Blitz just lay still, breathing slow, head resting on Harper's lap. But his ears no longer drooped like the night before. He knew this woman, somehow, somewhere deep in the part of himself that remembered even what the world had tried to erase. Harper never looked away from her. Then finally, after a long pause, she whispered. Her voice cautious, almost apologetic. "My name's Harper. If you're here to take him, you can't. He's not for sale." Vivian laughed, a short, cracked laugh, still tangled in the lump caught in her throat. "I'm not here to buy. I'm here to return." Harper furrowed her brow. Vivian looked up, and just then, the first real shaft of morning light slipped through the open garage and fell across half her face, where exhaustion met peace, and something old let itself be new again. "Blitz used to be mine, but if today he chooses to lie beside you, then he's already chosen his family. Again." Harper didn't reply, but something inside her shifted, like the surface of a still lake stirred by a single gentle ripple. Quiet, deep, real. Vivian rose. From the folds of her coat, she took out a small object and placed it carefully on the cement in front of Harper. "This is my card. I run a center outside the city. If Blitz needs care, rest. Or if you need somewhere for yourself, come." And then she left. No pressure, no promises, no turning back. The SUV rolled away like it had never stopped. Harper stared at the card. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for it. The text was clear. "Northgate K9 Sanctuary, Vivian Carver, Executive Director," and below it, in small, handwritten script, "A home for those who've never had one." Harper placed the card in her lap, eyes still fixed on the name printed in silver ink. The edges were already smudged from melting snow, but that handwritten line, soft, delicate, almost like it was still waiting, remained bold, like it had just been written. She looked at Blitz. He was still resting his head on her lap, breathing heavily. The dark patch of blood along his back had deepened overnight. His eyes were half closed, but his ears, they pointed in the direction the SUV had driven off. As if Blitz knew, something out there had once been his. Harper placed her hand gently on his forehead, her fingers trembling, partly from the cold, mostly from fear. She had learned that anything could vanish in a second. All it took was one mistake, one moment of trust in the wrong person. But Vivian's eyes weren't like the ones at the group homes. They weren't like the passers-by who glanced at Harper like she was just another piece of litter the city didn't know what to do with. No. Vivian had looked at Blitz like she was staring into a piece of her own heart. The next morning, dawn was slow to arrive. Sunlight hadn't yet cracked through the bricks lining the rail yard, but Harper was already awake. She wrapped the blanket tighter, bent down, and helped Blitz up. He trembled, but still he moved, one slow step at a time. Like if Harper moved forward, Blitz would find a way to follow, on one leg, on his elbows, or with nothing but sheer will. The gate to Northgate Sanctuary stood at the northern edge of the city. A white wooden fence, a modest sign, and an open gate, as if they'd been waiting all along. Vivian stood there. No fancy coat, no staged welcome. Just an older woman, hands gently folded in front of her, eyes steady on the dog limping toward her. She didn't cry this time. She simply closed her eyes, like anchoring herself in breath. "Welcome home," she whispered. Harper clutched the blanket closer. She didn't move, just stood there, taking in the open gate. The building behind it wasn't big, not flashy, but the lights were on. Something was cooking. A dog barked softly somewhere inside. And something about all of it felt like the dream Harper used to have when she lived with her mom. Vivian stepped forward, slowly. "Blitz was the best student I ever had," she said, her voice calm, not proud, not bitter. "He was trained to work with veterans who have PTSD. He could read signals, voices, even sadness that didn't have a name." Harper glanced at Blitz. He stood still beside her. Didn't flinch. But his tail wagged, just slightly, like it recognized something in that familiar voice. "We lost him in a break-in," Vivian continued. "The whole center was turned upside down. They didn't steal money. They stole Blitz." She exhaled, the kind of breath that carries years of silence. "We searched, vet clinics, rescue boards, shelters, but he was just gone. Until yesterday." She paused. I looked at Harper. "You sang to him, didn't you?" Harper gave a small nod. Vivian smiled, just enough to crease the corners of her mouth. And he lifted his head, another nod. Slower this time. Vivian knelt down. She didn't touch Blitz. She just looked into his eyes. "You remember, don't you, Blitz? You weren't forgotten, and you picked the right person." Silence fell, soft as fog. Harper opened her mouth. "I didn't know." Vivian looked up. "That's okay," she said gently. "I'm not here to take him back. There's nothing to take. If love found its way to the right place." She placed her hand gently on Harper's shoulder. "You can leave if you want to. But if you stay, you and Blitz will have a place to heal. No tests, no forms, no need to be good. Just be real and kind." Harper didn't answer right away. But something inside her loosened. Not the hardened scar tissue. Something deeper. A wound that was finally warming under a light it didn't expect. Blitz nudged her leg with his head. Lightly, like encouragement. Harper gripped the edge of the blanket, eyes still watching the gate behind Vivian, slightly ajar. She didn't run, didn't step forward yet. Just stood there, caught in that familiar space between mistrust and hope. Between hurt and the sliver of something that felt like a chance. Vivian didn't rush her. She simply waited, hand outstretched, not to rescue Harper, but to let her choose. No pity. No need to explain where she'd been. No apology for surviving. Harper looked down at Blitz. One of his legs lifted, shaky, and then stepped forward into the snow. His tail swayed. A long breath escaped his nose, wounded, tired, still bleeding. But Blitz was ready to walk farther, if Harper led the way. Harper lifted her head, her voice caught between ribs like wind stuck behind a closed door. I don't know why anyone would be kind to someone like me." Vivian didn't say anything at first. She simply nodded once, slowly, like the gesture had been waiting a long time to be used again. "Then maybe try trusting. Just this once." Inside the gray SUV, the back seat had already been prepared. A thick blanket was laid across the cushion, a small foam mat on the floor, and even a bowl of water set gently near the corner. As if someone already knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Harper lifted Blitz using every ounce of strength her 13-year-old body could muster. Blitz didn't resist. He simply rested his head against her chest, eyes half closed, ears tucked down. Vivian opened the door. The cold air swept in, carrying with it the scent of plastic, new fabric, and something strange. Something Harper hadn't smelled in a long time. Stability. Harper couldn't remember the last time she rode in a car. Maybe the day her mom drove her to school, or maybe the day the ambulance took her mom away and never brought her back. When the door clicked shut, the soundproofing took over. All the noise outside, sirens, train whistles, shouting voices, melted into a distant hum, fading further with each second in the rear-view mirror. The car began to move. Blitz curled up in her lap. His breathing slowed, grew steady, like he'd finally found a place where he didn't have to be on guard to breathe. Harper leaned her head against the window. Outside, Streetlights passed in long, blurred streaks, like time itself stretching out to make room for this moment. She didn't know where they were going, didn't know if this center was real or just another waiting room in disguise. One more stop before the world found a new way to send her back into the shadows. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't want to jump out. She looked down at Blitz, then gently laid her hand on his back. He wasn't a stray anymore. He wasn't a dog lying beside a dumpster, forgotten by the world. He was the one solid piece in Harper's universe that made her feel less invisible. "Where are we going?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Vivian didn't turn around, but her voice floated back over the seat, calm, steady, no need to raise it. "To a place made for kids who've survived more than they should," she said, "and for dogs whose stories haven't been told yet." Harper didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. And for the first time in over a year, she let someone else drive her life forward. The first morning at Northgate arrived with the scent of damp pine wood, the soft chirping of birds beyond the trees, and sunlight pouring through wide glass windows across a quiet room. Harper opened her eyes in a bed with clean sheets, a small bedside lamp, and a thin blanket that smelled faintly of soap. Blitz lay beside her, stretched out on the rug, one leg wrapped in white gauze, his tail giving a tiny wag at the sound of her breath. The door opened. A man stepped in, tall, with soft brown curls and a white lab coat. His smile wasn't dazzling, but it was calm, gentle enough not to make someone flinch. "I'm Owen, head nurse here. Welcome to Northgate." Harper didn't reply. She just clutched the edge of the blanket a little tighter. Blitz lifted his head and looked at Owen. No growl, no snarl, just quiet watchfulness. Harper noticed. The way Blitz looked at people, it was like a mirror, reflecting exactly how she felt about the world around her. Owen sat down at the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "Blitz needs his wound cleaned every day. A vet will come by, but if you'd like to learn how to care for him yourself, we can show you." Harper didn't know how to answer, but when Blitz turned, licked her hand, then looked at Owen, she gave a small nod. Outside, the grounds stretched wide, not like the cold, sterile shelters she'd known before. These were wooden cabins spaced apart, connected by gravel paths, surrounded by trees. The sound of dogs barking echoed in the distance, but it wasn't chaotic. It sounded alive. Vivian took her on a walk through the main area. "We don't train dogs here for tricks," she explained. "We train to heal. Every dog is a warrior, and every person here is fighting their own battle." They passed a wide, grassy yard, where a girl sat quietly next to a golden retriever. Her brown hair was neatly tied back. Her hands rested on her knees. She didn't speak, but when the dog looked up at her, she gently stroked its head. Her eyes were no longer lost. "That's Leah," Vivian said. "She hasn't spoken since her father died in a military accident. But here, no one forces her to speak. We just wait." Harper watched Leah. Then I looked at Blitz. She understood that feeling, the one where no words seem right for what lives inside. In the community room, a burly man with a graying beard gently laid his hand on the back of a Doberman. His eyes were closed, lips pressed tight, but his shoulders no longer clenched. "That's Mike, Marine Corps vet. He used to go nights without sleep. Now he can only rest with a dog next to him." Harper didn't ask anything. She just watched. There were no shouting voices at Northgate, no metal doors, no suspicious stares, only quiet footsteps, silent touches, and something Harper had never seen in any place she'd been. Trust, maybe just in fragments, but slowly taking root. That evening, Harper sat beneath the porch awning, Blitz beside her. She stroked his back, and for the first time realized that presence, even without words, could be medicine. Vivian placed a food tray down beside them. "No one here asks about your past," she said. "The only thing we care about is tomorrow." Harper didn't respond. But inside her, a door cracked open. A place that didn't ask why she came, that didn't need to know what she had done. Just that she and Blitz weren't being chased away anymore. Blitz was moved to the special care wing behind the clinic. The room smelled of herbs, not bleach. No sharp clinks of metal, only soft lighting and the hum of an essential oil diffuser in the corner. The vet was an older woman, silver hair tied back, her eyes deep with the memory of 1,000 wounds, and still holding a gentleness that couldn't be faked. She didn't rush to Blitz. She simply sat, placed a treat in her palm, and let Blitz decide. Harper sat beside him. Her hand rested on Blitz's head, steadying him. After 3 long minutes of silence, Blitz slowly lifted his nose, sniffed, and gently licked the palm. Just once, but it was enough for the woman to smile and say softly, "That's good." The healing began. Every day, Harper and Owen changed his bandages, checked the wounds, noted his recovery. The stitches along Blitz's side were no longer bleeding. His injured hind leg made him limp, but the pain wasn't what it was before. Still, it wasn't just the body that needed healing. Blitz, the same dog who had flung himself at 3 attackers who growled in the dark to protect, now flinched when strangers approached. He didn't bark, didn't lash out, but his eyes would dart away, like he carried memories too, and a fear that, if he wasn't careful, someone would take him again. Harper saw that more clearly than anyone, because she knew what it felt like to carry wounds no one could see, and when no one sees, no one comes to help. One morning, Harper opened the care room door and found Blitz not curled in his usual corner, but standing by the window, looking out toward the training yard. His back was still slightly hunched, but his tail was swaying gently. Harper stepped closer and called softly, "Blitz." Blitz turned his head. His eyes didn't flinch. He stepped closer, and for the first time in many days, Blitz rested his head gently in Harper's lap. That feeling, it was like a ray of winter sunlight. Not bright, not blazing. Just a slow warmth that soaked through skin long used to the cold. From that morning on, Blitz was allowed back outside, once a day, every morning. Harper held the leash. Not as a trainer, not as a handler, just as a companion. Blitz walked slowly, but steady. No commands, no fences. At Field 3, a golden retriever was working on a scent drill with a retired vet. Blitz paused. He watched. No barking, just a slight tilt of the head. Then he sat, quietly observing. Harper sat down next to him. A young staff member came over. "This one's been trained before," they whispered. "You see the way he watches? That's the look of a warrior." Harper didn't turn. She just rested her hand on Blitz's head and smiled faintly. "Blitz used to be someone's everything," she said. "Now, he's mine." Days passed, then weeks. Blitz no longer recoiled from a gentle touch. He wasn't startled by headlights or train horns anymore. His wounds had closed. But what surprised everyone was this. Whenever Blitz stood beside Harper, his breathing, once ragged, became calmer. As if her presence was the last dose of medicine he needed. Something no prescription could ever give. And Harper was healing too. Not through pills or therapy, but in those quiet mornings with Blitz at her side. In learning how to meet a living creature's eyes without fearing abandonment. Through the silent loyalty of a dog, stolen, forgotten, but never broken. One foggy morning, Harper saw Vivian standing by the grass near the front gate. She didn't say much, just raised a hand, waved gently, then placed a thick notebook on a stone bench nearby. "Your first day," Vivian said, her voice soft as the wind. "You don't have to remember it all. Just observe and write it down." Harper picked up the notebook. Brown leather cover, corners worn. On the first page, a line of elegant handwritten script. "Dogs don't speak, but they always listen. Learn to listen back." From that day, Harper became a part of the Northgate training sessions. Not to teach, not to be taught. She learned by watching Blitz, by standing beside Vivian, by staying quiet long enough to hear what lived between two breaths. Vivian taught her the language of canine bodies, the tilted head of uncertainty, the lowered shoulders of unease. That wagging tails didn't always mean joy. Every motion, every look, carried a message. And Blitz, a silent teacher, taught Harper more than any book ever could. Sometimes, Harper only had to lay a hand on Blitz's back. If he tensed, she knew something was off. If he rolled onto his side, exposing his belly, she knew this place was finally safe. Vivian once shared Blitz's past, how he was trained to sense human emotion, how he once lay beside sleepless veterans, how he lifted his head quietly when someone was about to spiral into panic. Until Blitz was stolen, sold, forced to fight. The skills meant to heal turned into tools to survive. Harper didn't speak when she heard that. She just held the leash tighter. She knew. She'd been forced to survive too, in a world that didn't need her gentleness. Only her silence. Each evening after training, Harper spent an hour writing in the notebook. Not about her life, but Blitz's reactions to strangers, to car horns, to scared dogs nearby. Messy handwriting, but full of feeling. And day by day, Harper realized she wasn't just observing Blitz. She was seeing herself. One night, after the healing center lights dimmed, Harper sat beside Vivian on the porch steps. A soft breeze carried the scent of lavender from the garden. Vivian glanced at her, voice low. "You see how Blitz lies down when you're near? That's trust. And no one can force a dog to do that." Harper nodded, her hand resting on Blitz's neck. His breath was even. Her heartbeat, too. Then she whispered, "Can I learn to be like you?" Vivian didn't look surprised. She just said, "You already are, Harper. Only those who've been hurt are gentle enough to heal." That night, Harper placed the notebook beside her pillow. Blitz lay curled at the foot of the bed, eyes half closed, ears twitching at faint sounds. Outside the window, the trees stirred in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, Harper smiled before closing her eyes. Not because everything was fixed, but because she was learning how to make it okay one breath at a time. The next morning, in the east greenhouse where light spilled gently through thick glass panels, Harper sat quietly on a low wooden stool. She wore a gray center-issued t-shirt, the hem slightly wrinkled, her hands still holding Blitz's leash tight. There were no speakers in the room, no music, just the faint scrape of chairs, the soft sighs, and the heavy steps of veterans slowly entering one by one. They sat in a circle. Each person carried something invisible, a wound without a name, a memory too heavy for words. Harper said nothing. She looked at Blitz, and Blitz, familiar with silence by now, needed no command. He simply sat beside her, eyes glancing from one face to the next, then stopping as an older man entered last. His military coat was faded, one shoulder slouched as if carrying the weight of years. He took a seat. No words, no eye contact. His gaze fell to the floor, both hands clutching a worn wool cap. One breath, then another. Then Blitz stood. No one told him. No one guided him. But he stepped away from Harper, his paws landing quietly on the wood, and slowly approached the man. Harper's hand tightened around the leash, unsure. But Vivian, sitting behind her, gently touched Harper's shoulder. No words, just a small signal. Let him go. Blitz stepped closer. No sniffing, no jumping. He simply sat right next to the man's boot. Then he gently rested his head against the man's knee. The man didn't move at first. Silence lingered for a moment. Then, his shoulders trembled. A shaking hand slowly reached out, resting on Blitz's head. And then, like a dam cracking after too much pressure, the man doubled over, wrapping his arms around Blitz, sobbing without sound. One gasp, then another. Tears spilled down into Blitz's thick black fur, warm and steady. No one in the room spoke. No one needed to. Only the sound of crying and the calm breathing of a dog who asked no questions, made no judgments, just stayed. Harper watched without blinking. She had never seen anything like this. A person breaking not from pain, but from being touched, right when he thought no one ever would again. After the session, when everyone else had left, the man approached Harper. He didn't meet her eyes. His voice was low, hoarse. That dog. He did something I didn't think anyone could do anymore. Harper nodded slightly. I didn't teach him that, she whispered. He just knows when someone needs someone to stay. The man paused, then placed a hand on Blitz's head again this time, as a thank you. Vivian stood at the far end of the room, her gaze deep and steady. She watched Harper, then quietly turned away. No praise, no declarations, just the quiet knowledge. Another door had opened. That night, as Blitz curled beside the bed, Harper opened her notebook and wrote a single line. Some wounds are invisible, but Blitz always knows where they are. She put the pen down, looked over at Blitz. He wagged his tail just a little. Neither of them said a word. But something had changed. That much was clear. The next morning, the therapy room felt slower somehow. Same circle of old chairs, same frosted windows, and sunlight tracing long golden streaks across the worn wood floor. Harper sat beside Blitz. She was used to the stillness here now. But today, when Vivian spoke, her voice carried something gentler than usual. Before we begin, she said, does anyone want to share something? Silence. Then the sound of a chair shifting. The same older man from the day before stood up. His faded military coat hung loose, collar rumpled like he hadn't faced a mirror in days. But his eyes, they were different. Softer. Brighter. Like there was water behind them now, not just fog. I was recon, he said. Afghanistan, 2009. I came back home, but I never went back to sleep. He paused. Exhaled. The next words came slow, like they were being pulled from deep underground. 3 years. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time. Every time I close my eyes, I see the last man I couldn't save. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Last night I sat on the porch. Blitz came over, laid his head on my leg. I didn't move. Didn't pet him. Didn't send him away. Just let him stay. He inhaled. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. The room went completely still. I slept 7 hours, straight through, no nightmares, no flinching. His voice didn't break, but his hands trembled. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was dying. Blitz remained beside Harper. He didn't lift his head, didn't wag, but his eyes met the man's, holding something steady, something real. The man looked at Harper, He didn't know what to say, so he just bowed his head. "Thank you for letting Blitz stay." Harper nodded gently, her lips pressed together, not to hold back tears, but to keep hold of something that had just begun to grow inside her. A belief that this dog wasn't just someone she had rescued, but someone who was rescuing others, piece by piece. The therapy session continued like usual, but the air wasn't the same. The men who once sat silent started watching Blitz a little longer. One slid his chair a bit closer. Another reached out to gently run a hand down Blitz's back. No one spoke it aloud, but their eyes all said the same thing: gratitude and wonder. That night, Harper wrote again, Blitz never asks about anyone's past. He just chooses to stay exactly where someone once believed they didn't deserve to be loved. Blitz lay at the foot of her bed, one ear folded, the other slightly lifted, alert but calm. The room was small, but somehow it felt big enough to start healing an entire life. Harper closed her notebook and set it on the shelf. Her hand lingered for a few seconds on the page she had just written, like she was trying to hold on to a feeling that was already starting to fade. Then she got up, tiptoed to the window, and gently pulled back the curtain. Outside, the moon traced a thin silver line along the stone path. A shadow of a tree tilted across the grass like a story still waiting to be told. In the distance, the training kennels were still lit. A dog barked once, sharp, short, certain, as if to say, "This is home." Harper leaned her forehead against the glass. Her breath left a small, fogged circle. She drew on it, a round shape, then a soft curve. Not a smile, not a face, just something instinctive, tender, and unnamed. She couldn't remember the exact day she left the group home, couldn't recall what the pavement felt like under her first step out the door, couldn't say why, in that moment, she didn't run when she saw Blitz barely breathing beside a dumpster. But now, looking back, it all made sense. Maybe she had been the one abandoned first, and Blitz, though broken, had chosen to come closer. He didn't ask who she was, didn't question why she was there. He just laid down beside her and stayed. Harper touched her wrist, the faint scar that once marked every time she doubted she was worth continuing. Now she didn't want to erase it. She left it there, like a dash between two versions of her life. One side was darkness, the other, slowly, softly, was beginning to light up. She turned to look at Blitz. He wasn't asleep yet, but his eyes were barely open. When Harper sat back on the bed, Blitz stretched out, laid his head on her leg, and let out a deep sigh. A long breath, but a soft one. Not from exhaustion, but release. Harper whispered, for the first time, not for anyone else to hear. "I'm learning too, Blitz, to trust, not rushing it, not forcing myself to be okay again. But I know I'm walking the right path." Outside, the wind stirred the roof tiles. And inside that small room, a girl who had once gone unnamed was now slowly learning how to name herself again, each day, through the quiet eyes of a loyal dog. A future maybe not sturdy yet, but undeniably real. And that night, while Blitz slept soundly, Harper closed her eyes too. No dreams, no fears. Just presence. The quiet presence of two souls who had once lost everything, now slowly finding themselves in each other. The next morning there was no alarm. Harper woke up to sunlight bleeding through foggy glass, slanting across the ceiling like a quiet whisper. Blitz still lay beneath her bed, his breathing slow and steady. She sat up, stretched lightly, and reached down to touch his head. Blitz stirred, then wagged his tail, no call needed. The morning passed just like any other, breakfast with Vivian, cleanup with Nurse Owen, a walk with Blitz out to the training field, everything soft, warm, and just steady enough to make you believe life could be kind if you gave it time, until Vivian walked into the rec room with an iPad in hand and a look in her eyes that held something unspoken. "Harper, can you come here for a moment?" Harper walked over. Her gaze wasn't scared, but it wasn't curious either. It was just observant. A habit formed over years of learning that any change, no matter how small, could be dangerous. Vivian turned the screen gently. A video. 18 seconds long. Harper, sitting on the steps of a train station. Blitz beside her. She was singing. An old song, voice quiet but steady. Blitz looked up and wagged his tail at the exact right moment. A child not asking for money, not waiting for attention. Just singing. Simply existing. Vivian scrolled down. Over 1 million views, 8,000 shares. The title read, "The Homeless Girl Who Sang with Her Dog in the Snow." Comments poured in. One asked, "Where is this girl now?" Another cried, saying the song reminded them of their mother. One user wrote, "Please don't find her. Don't turn a beautiful moment into a sad story crushed by cold law." Harper stayed quiet. She sat down, eyes fixed on the screen. Vivian waited. Then, in a voice as calm as ever, Harper asked, "Who posted it?" "We don't know. Probably someone passing by that day. It looks like footage from an old phone camera. But now it's on several local news sites." Harper didn't reply. Blitz walked up and rested his head against her leg. A gesture so natural, it felt like reflex. Like Blitz could sense something in the air had shifted. Vivian sat beside her. No pep talk, no promises. Just one sentence. "I'm here. No matter what happens." Harper nodded. Software, but deep. Because she knew, another door had just opened. Not a door of hope, a door of risk, because someone might recognize her. Someone might search the name Harper Lane in the database of missing minors. Someone might contact Child Protective Services. Harper didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing. This time she wasn't alone. And Blitz would stand between her and whatever the world tried to throw her way. 3 days after the video went viral, Vivian got a call from an unknown number. She answered, spoke little, just nodded once, then scheduled a meeting for Thursday afternoon. When she hung up, she stood by the window, holding a steaming cup of coffee. Outside, it had started to snow again. Owen, quiet, asked, "Is something wrong?" Vivian didn't answer, but the way she set the cup down, carefully, gently, like even a small sound could shatter whatever fragile peace they still had left, said everything. That afternoon, a government vehicle from the Department of Family Services pulled up outside the gates of Northgate. A woman stepped out, wearing a beige trench coat, a case folder in one hand. Her eyes weren't cold, but they were firm. Her name was Karen Mitchell, State Child Welfare Investigator. "We've identified Harper Lane in a recently viral video," the woman said as she sat down in the main office. Vivian didn't flinch. "She was previously part of the system," Karen continued. "Missing for over 11 months. There were reports of abuse at a temporary shelter. No trace of her since... until now." Vivian placed her hand on the desk. Calm. Unhurried. "I know where she came from," she said softly. "But I also know where she is now is far better than the place that let her slip through." Karen didn't argue. Instead, she opened a file and laid out several photos of Harper from her time in the system. The eyes were different, colder, emptier. "She's changed," Karen noted, not with judgment, with recognition. Vivian nodded, just barely. "She doesn't flinch when someone gets close," she said. "She doesn't stare at the floor when someone calls her name. And Blitz, the dog she once saved, has been saving her back in a way no report could ever capture." Karen closed the file. "We'll need to conduct an investigation," she said. "We'll need to confirm custody status. For now, Harper isn't allowed to leave the state, and we may have to separate the two if higher-ups request it." That last line drew a heavy silence into the room. Vivian looked up. "Do you understand what it means to take a child away from the one thing anchoring her?" Her voice wasn't raised, not begging, not threatening, just firm. Karen sighed. "I don't want that to happen." "Then don't let it." Karen left shortly after. No subpoena, no formal orders. But she said, "Someone will be in touch soon, and I hope whatever comes next is something you and Harper truly deserve." That night, Harper sat beside Blitz's bed in silence. She'd overheard bits and pieces, enough to know it wasn't simple. Blitz looked up at her. She reached out and touched his nose. "I won't let them separate us," she whispered. Not sure if she was speaking to Blitz or to herself. Outside, Chicago's snow still fell, but in the quiet room at Northgate, the warm light glowed against an old bed where a girl sat holding tight to the only thing she had ever called family. Harper didn't sleep. She sat frozen, gripping her pillow, eyes wide in the dark. No noise. Just the hammering of her heart like it was trying to break free from her chest. She could hear the wind whistling outside the window, footsteps in the hallway, each step sliced into the fragile peace she had just begun to believe in. That old feeling crept back, like the shadows that used to stalk her behind locked doors, like the cold nights on the street when she knew no one was coming. She got up, trembling, reached into the drawer, gathered the little things she'd collected since arriving. Her journal, a pen, a photo tacked to the wall. Her and Blitz, smiling in the sun. She packed it all into her worn-out backpack. Not much, just enough to run. She bent down to unzip the sleeping bag. Blitz was still beside her, but his eyes were open watching. That look, like he already knew what she was about to do. "Blitz," she whispered, tiptoeing to the door. Blitz sprang to his feet. No bark, no growl, just stood, blocking her path. Harper froze. Her heart thundered in her ears. "Let me go!" she choked out. "I don't want to go back there. They'll lock me up again, ask me a million things. They'll take me away, Blitz. They won't let you come with me." Blitz didn't move. Tears came. For the first time in months, they fell without control. She pressed her fists lightly against his chest, not out of anger, but helplessness. "Don't look at me like that. You don't understand. No one does." Blitz stayed still, eyes locked on hers. Harper collapsed to her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You're the only family I have." Blitz let out a soft whine, then stepped closer, rested his head gently on her shoulder. No words, just breathe. A steady heartbeat, the quiet presence of someone who wasn't going anywhere. Eventually, Harper let go of the backpack. She sank down next to Blitz, resting her head against his back. Silent. Tearless now. But one thing was very, very clear. If Blitz wasn't leaving, then neither was she. Because for the first time in her life, someone, without asking, had chosen to stay. The next morning, Vivian knocked softly on the wooden door. Harper was already awake. She hadn't slept since the night before, just lay still, one hand buried in Blitz's fur, as if he might disappear if she looked away. Vivian didn't say much. She simply placed a yellow envelope on the desk, nodding gently. "A court summons," she said softly. "The hearing is scheduled for this Friday." Harper sat up, her eyes locked onto the envelope like it might bite back. The printed words on the front weren't new to her, a summons for a missing minor. At the bottom, it was clear: legal custody hearing. Blitz lifted his head, sensing the change in the room. He wagged his tail once, then stood and rested his head gently on Harper's hand. Vivian stepped closer. "No one's going to force you into anything," she said. "But if you want, I'll petition to become your guardian." Harper looked up. Her eyes weren't afraid of the law, not afraid of courtrooms. She was afraid of the thing she knew best being taken away, torn from the one being who had stayed when she had nothing left. "What about Blitz?" she asked, her voice raw. Vivian didn't answer right away. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded gently in her lap, and let out a long breath. "Blitz is the reason I found you. The reason I knew you weren't just a file, not just a case. You're a person. You feel, you grieve, you bond in a way no document can ever explain." Harper lowered her head and wrapped her arms around Blitz. "What if the court doesn't let us stay together?" Vivian held her gaze, silent for a beat, then said quietly, "Then we fight. Until they understand, or until we find somewhere that does." Blitz tucked his head into Harper's lap. Outside, the wind brushed against the window, a soft whistling, not menacing this time, but more like a distant whisper. Something was shifting. A new fight was beginning. But this time, Harper wouldn't fight alone. The courtroom wasn't large. Warm wooden walls, soft lighting, long benches in neat rows. The judge's chair sat high, red velvet slightly faded with time, but still commanding. Harper sat between Vivian and the court-appointed attorney. Blitz lay quietly at her feet, head resting between her hands. No one told Blitz what to do, but he just knew lying still, as if his very presence might sway something important. Mike was the first to rise. He walked slowly, back slightly stooped. His sun-aged face was lined with creases hardened by combat. He stood at the witness stand, his voice low and firm. "I'm a veteran. I didn't believe in therapy, though I didn't need help, though I didn't deserve it. Then Blitz came into my life." He turned to Harper and gave a small nod, not fast, not showy. "This girl didn't just save a dog. She saved me, with a gentleness that didn't need words, with a way of listening that didn't judge. If the system ever let her fall through the cracks, this is the time to repair it." No one said a word, just the soft sound of paper turning. Then stillness again. Next was Leah. The young girl stood and walked up to the front. No one prompted her. No one stopped her. Harper tilted her head, watching, then leaned forward slightly, holding her breath. Leah turned towards the judge, her hands clutching the hem of her shirt. "Her name is—" The voice was small, but carried. "Harper?" One word, slow, clear. A name spoken by someone who hadn't said a word in nearly 2 years. Harper's hand flew to her mouth. Blitz stirred, raising his head, as if even he could feel something big had just broken free. The room stayed silent. And then, the vet stepped forward. "I've been monitoring Blitz's recovery," he said, voice calm but steady. "This dog came in severely injured, wouldn't eat, hyperdefensive. But the first time Harper held him in the exam room, we saw his heart rate drop. Breathing slowed, all from one touch." He turned to Harper. "Harper didn't just save this dog," the vet said, voice catching slightly. "She made Blitz believe in love again. She taught him how to give. The judge took notes quietly. She was an older woman, silver hair uncolored, pulled neatly back. Her eyes weren't cold, but they weren't easily swayed either. She looked at each speaker not with emotion, but with something deeper, acknowledgement. Harper didn't cry. She simply leaned forward a little, her hand resting firmly on Blitz's back, as if to make sure he was still there. Blitz didn't move. He just lay still. Eyes closed, but his ears were up, as if he knew today he didn't need to speak, because for the first time in Harper's life, there were others who had chosen to speak for her. The courtroom stayed silent. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than usual. Outside the foggy window, snow kept falling, soft, steady, almost reverent. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Until the woman on the high bench leaned slightly towards the microphone. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried. "Harper Lane." She paused. Her eyes slowly rose from the paper before her to the young girl sitting beside her dog. "You don't have to run anymore." Another pause. "You don't have to brace yourself to survive one more night in this freezing city. You don't have to flinch every time someone comes near. You don't have to anymore." The judge set her pen down. "Northgate is your home." In that instant, the room seemed to go still. Harper's eyes widened. She didn't shout. She didn't leap from her seat. She didn't even turn to look at anyone, searching for reassurance. Her lips parted slightly. A breath escaped, like something inside her had finally unclenched. And then tears came. Quiet, unstoppable, not the sobbing kind, but the tears of someone who had held it in for too long and had finally been given permission to let go. Blitz pressed his head into Harper's lap. No bark, no whimper, just presence. Harper held him close, her cheek against the thick fur she had once used for warmth on that first bitter night in Chicago. No one in the courtroom said a word. Not Vivian, not the judge, not the lawyer. Only Vivian reached over, placing a hand on Harper's back. Light but steady, like a silent promise. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." And Harper, for the first time in her life, believed it. Believed it with every breath that clung to her shoulder. Believed it through the gentle rhythm of a chest rising and falling in her lap, belonging to a dog whose eyes stayed closed, as if he too had dreamed this dream for a long, long time. And now, finally, the dream was real. The next morning, as the first light filtered through the misty windows of Northgate, Harper woke in the room she now called home. But something inside her felt new, like a blank page waiting to be written. There were no more train whistles howling through the night. No more staggered footsteps of drunk strangers wandering the alleyways. Just the soft rustle of leaves outside and the steady sound of Blitz shifting beneath the bed. Out back on the steps of the center, Vivian sat quietly, holding a mug of steaming tea. When Harper stepped out, she said nothing. She simply slid the cup over, an unspoken invitation. Harper sat down. Blitz settled beside her. All three sat in silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken gratitude, of a trust that was slowly growing between people who once feared even the sound of their own footsteps. After a long while, Vivian asked, without turning her head, "If you could rewrite just one small piece of this world, where would you begin?" Harper didn't answer right away. She looked at Blitz. He lifted his head and wagged his tail. A few days later, a new sheet of paper appeared on the bulletin board at Northgate. The handwriting was neat, gentle. "Pilot Therapy Program for Children with Trauma, with the special support of therapy dogs. Lead therapist, Vivian Carver, assistant trainer, Harper Lane, and below that, a childlike sketch of a dog resting its chin on a child's knee. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't proportional, but it was warm. On the first day of class, only 2 kids showed up. A boy who didn't speak a word, a girl who refused to take off her headphones. But Blitz didn't mind. He made his rounds, one child at a time, sat beside them, rested his head gently on a knee. His eyes are patient, never needing to be called. And Harper, with her small name tag clipped to her shirt, leash in hand, didn't instruct, didn't command. She just stood there. Sometimes she sat down, lowering herself to their eye level. No questions, no pressure, no pretending to be anyone she wasn't. She simply stayed. Just like Blitz had done for her that first night in the snow. And week by week the little room grew warmer. Soft laughter crept back in, a hesitant nod, a shy hug. A small hand reached out for the first time and rested on a dog who no longer feared touch. Behind the door, Vivian watched it all, and for the first time in her years running Northgate, she felt it, that something was going right. No long-term strategic plans, no big funding. Just 2 beings who once were left behind, daring to move forward together. On the 3rd day of therapy, the door opened. A young woman stepped in, holding the hand of a boy around 10. Thin. Sleeves are too long. A worn backpack slumped off one shoulder. The boy didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. His name was Jonas. His mother whispered one sentence to Vivian before leaving. "He hasn't spoken to anyone since my husband died in Kandahar." Jonas stood at the edge of the room. Didn't sit, didn't approach. His eyes drifted somewhere far, as if he wasn't in the room at all. Harper didn't rush. She simply sat on the rug, doodling like every other day. Blitz lay beside her, head resting across his front paws, eyes half closed. But his ears were slightly raised, listening for the kind of sorrow that never made a sound. After a while, Harper put her pencil down. She didn't call Jonas, just let out a soft, familiar whistle, a sound only Blitz and she understood. Blitz stood up, moved slowly, didn't look straight at Jonas, didn't head over directly. He circled, the way wounded animals sometimes approach another broken soul. Jonas flinched. He stepped back, his shoulder touched the wall. Blitz stopped. And then, for a long time, no one moved. No one said a word. Then Blitz sat. He didn't move again. Didn't push forward. Just looked up at the boy, with those deep black eyes that had once helped Harper find her footing on the coldest night of her life. Jonas looked back. His eyes flickered, as if something inside was torn, afraid but longing. Longing for something that had once been taken too soon. And then, Blitz lowered his head. Gently, he placed his chin on Jonas's foot. Jonas wasn't ready for it. A quiet sob escaped his throat. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a name. It was just tears. Silent. Unstoppable. He dropped to his knees, wrapped both arms around Blitz, tightly, like he feared the dog might vanish. And for the first time since that dark day, Jonas cried. Not from pain, not from fear, but because, finally, something came close to him without asking questions, and without walking away. Harper didn't move, her vision blurred, but no tears fell. Because in that moment she saw herself, small and trembling, curled beside Blitz on that frozen train platform, clutching his fur in the dark. And now, Another child was trembling too, not from cold, but from a sudden, overwhelming gratitude. A quiet circle was being completed, not in words, but in presence. Northgate didn't heal with miracles. It healed by showing up, with a dog who knew when silence mattered most, and with a girl who once believed she had no place, now showing others that falling down doesn't mean you're weak. That afternoon, the backyard of the center basked in sunlight. Leah sat under the awning, quietly braiding paracord into a collar. Mike wasn't far off, gently stroking the back of a small rescue pup brought in last week. Still skittish, still flinching at loud sounds. Harper was working with Blitz at the far end of the yard. A 6-year-old girl, recently in a car accident, had been brought in by Vivian. The child didn't speak. She stared at Blitz with wary eyes, then slowly reached out and touched his ear. Blitz stayed still. Then let out a quiet breath, his pink tongue brushing softly against her fingers. A smile, the very first, crept across the girl's tiny face. Harper said nothing. She just sat down, allowing the child to decide if she wanted to come closer. Blitz, as always, didn't need instructions. He simply knew who needed him most. Inside, Nurse Owen set a cup of tea down in front of Vivian. They both watched through the window, where golden sunlight poured across every blade of grass, every brick beneath the children's feet. "What's the little one's name again?" Owen asked softly. "Lila," Vivian replied, her eyes still following Harper and the small girl beside Blitz. Then she smiled, not wide or radiant, but the kind of smile that only comes when you know, with your whole being, that you're doing something right. Moments later, Mike walked over. He said nothing, just placed a handmade leather collar on the table. "For Blitz," he said, his voice low. Engraved on the collar, in small, careful letters, "Silent Guardian, Quiet Healer." Leah followed behind him. Shy, she placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. Inside was a crayon drawing, Harper sitting beside Blitz. And underneath, in neat handwriting, "Family." No one said a word. But in that room, filled with people who had once been broken by war, by loss, by being left behind, something was being stitched back together, by hand, by the paw, by the warmth of a dog's breath. The family, at Northgate, didn't need shared blood. It didn't need portraits on the wall. It just needed someone who'd sit beside you when the night got cold. And someone, even if it was a dog, who would stand between you and the wind when you fell. Blitz curled at Harper's feet. Lila dozed off beside him, her head resting against his back. Vivian looked at the three of them, then turned to Owen, her voice soft as breath. "That's what family looks like." The next morning, there was an envelope sitting on Vivian's desk. Cream-colored, embossed with the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inside was an official invitation. Harper Lane and Blitz were invited to speak at the National Trauma Recovery Conference in Washington, D.C., a gathering of hundreds of doctors, psychologists, veterans, and survivors of loss, pain, and silence. When Vivian laid the letter on the kitchen table, Harper was still drying dishes with Leah. She glanced up, frowning, as if she'd done something wrong. "Harper," Vivian said gently, "I think you should read this." Harper opened the letter with trembling hands. She read it once through, then went still. "I don't know how to talk in front of people," she murmured, eyes fixed on the gray tile floor. "I'm not good at that. I'm not special." Vivian didn't argue. She simply slid a small photo toward her, a candid shot. In it, Blitz lay curled beside a weeping veteran, and Harper sat just behind, her hand resting on both of them. "You don't need to say anything," Vivian replied. You just need to be yourself. 3 weeks later, the conference hall was packed. Harper wore a simple knit dress, hair tied back. Blitz walked beside her, the Northgate scarf knotted around his neck like a quiet badge of honor. Harper waited backstage, hands shaking. When the moderator called her name, a spotlight cut across the floor. Harper stepped forward. No music, no fanfare, just the sound of her footsteps and the soft scrape of Blitz's paws on hardwood. She stood there, facing hundreds of eyes, silent. But Blitz touched her foot, a quiet nudge, like he always did, like he had in those first frozen nights, like when he licked her tears inside the abandoned garage. Harper took a breath, looked down at Blitz, and spoke, calm, steady. I rescued him, but he's been rescuing me every day. The entire room stood. No one said a word. Then applause thundered through the hall. Veterans, widows, trauma survivors. They all rose. Some wiped their eyes. Blitz sat calmly at Harper's side. His gaze was distant, unaffected by the sound. But his tail moved, just slightly, enough to show he understood what was happening. Harper bowed her head. Not in fear. Thanks. Because now she understood. She didn't need grand speeches, or a perfect past. She just needed to stand beside a dog who listened, and a room full of strangers who had believed in her, before she believed in herself. That evening, when they returned to Northgate, Harper didn't go inside right away. She paused on the little path that curved behind the building, where a new wooden sign had been installed. The lettering was hand-carved, uneven, but warm. Harper and Blitz Recovery Garden. Blitz walked slowly. Each step left an imprint in the soft grass. His fur had started graying around the ears, but his pace was steady, like every step still carried the mission he'd had from the very beginning. Don't leave anyone behind. Harper walked beside him, leashless. She didn't need it anymore. Blitz didn't need to be led, only to be joined. On a stone bench beneath the big maple tree, a boy sat sketching. Jonas, the same notebook he once shredded in anger, now sat open in his lap. Blitz didn't rush. He just paused. Then looked up at Harper, waiting for her signal. She nodded. Blitz approached, slowly, then rested his head on Jonas's knee, just like the very first time. Jonas smiled. It wasn't big, but the sun caught the corners of his lips, and his shoulders didn't flinch like they used to. Harper turned away, not to avoid it, but because she knew now. Healing moments don't need witnesses. They just need permission. That night, when everyone had gone inside, Harper remained on the porch. Through the glass, she saw Vivian making tea, Owen reading a report, Leah giggling beside Lila, Mike repairing an old vest. The vet coaxed a rescue dog to eat. None of them were family by blood. But Harper knew, deep down, that these people, and Blitz, had rewritten the definition of what family really meant. No one needed to match. No one needed a perfect start. You just had to be willing, not to let go when things went quiet. Blitz curled at her feet, like always, his eyes half closed, but his tail tapped softly against her leg, the slow rhythm of a wordless song only the two of them knew. Harper sat down, leaned against the wooden wall, rested her hand on Blitz's back. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because she knew, from the moment she chose not to run and Blitz chose not to leave, everything had changed. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Late afternoon. The wind off Lake Michigan still drifted across Northgate. Cold, but no longer sharp like the day Harper curled up beneath that rusted awning, no longer cutting through layers of sleeves and skin. Now, it just whispered through the maple leaves, like a quiet reminder. Winter would pass, and even the heaviest memories could be carried in gentler forms. Harper sat beneath the tree. Blitz rested his head on her lap, like always. His body wasn't as quick as it had been on the city streets, but his breathing was steady, deep. Each rise and fall of his chest was a quiet promise that he was still here, still choosing to stay. In Harper's lap was a worn sketchbook. The leather cover had curled from old rain. But today, between the half-drawn pages, one blank page had been turned, and on it she had written, "I don't need much, just a heart that stays, and a dog that never leaves." She sat still. She didn't write it for anyone to read. I didn't need it to be understood. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a badge. It was a breath made visible. A quiet thank you to the creature sleeping beneath her, and to the younger version of herself who hadn't quit, even when no one else believed. Blitz stirred slightly, didn't open his eyes, but his tail wagged, just once, enough for Harper to feel the warmth on her ankle. Vivian approached from a distance. She didn't speak. She simply paused, a few steps away, and watched Harper, watched Blitz. Then she turned and walked back inside. Because she understood, some moments don't need witnesses, they're already whole on their own. The last light of the day spilled across Northgate's rooftop. Out on the lawn, a few boys were walking dogs in gentle loops, laughter tangled with soft barks. Leah zipped past on her bike, waving as she passed Harper, her hair catching the wind. Mike sat farther off, leaning against a wooden wall, eyes closed, quietly mouthing an old poem to himself. Harper saw it all. No longer guarded, no longer bracing. She simply sat, right there, in the middle of it all, and knew one thing with quiet certainty. No matter how many times the world outside shifted, no matter how many court dates, viral clips, or harsh judgments, here, beneath the old maple tree, there would always be space for her, a place where love didn't need conditions. And Blitz, the dog who never said a word, still lay beside her, as silent as a vow. No one needed to label what it was. Because sometimes, it's enough just to know that there exists a place in the world where a once-lost girl and a once-stolen dog had found each other, and stayed. Not because they were forced to, but because, finally, they'd both found a reason to stop running. Not everyone has known what it feels like to be so cold that even the softest touch might break you. But Harper did. And Blitz did too. And they knew. Sometimes a home isn't made of bricks or beams or doors. Sometimes it's made of a dog who listens. A German shepherd like Blitz is not just smart or loyal. He's the last shelter for a soul that's been torn apart. No words, no explanations, just a look, a drooping ear, a breath beside your foot is enough to make you believe you're still loved. The story of Harper and Blitz is no fairy tale. It's a living truth. That love, when placed where it belongs, can heal wounds that medicine and time have long since given up on. And if you ever see a dog sitting quietly by the side of the road, don't just pass by. Because maybe he's guarding a heart still learning how to trust the world again.